Hello everyone, I hope you're safe and well. Last time I read a chapter of the book called The Twits and I introduced myself as Holly's dad. My little boy was a little bit upset by this and ended up shouting at the television, "That's my daddy too." So, I am John and I am Holly and Eddie's daddy. Today I'm going to read a chapter of a book called Woof, and the chapter is entitled Bo Peep. Okay. When Eric and Roy arrived at Hobbs's recreation ground, they found the entrance decorated with coloured flags. A large banner announcing the sports flapped gently in the breeze. There was an ice cream van parked in the street, with a queue of customers already formed. A baby in a pram nearby was bawling. Rolfe Street Primary School Sports Day was, in fact, rather more than a sports day. For one thing, the Parent-Teacher Association took the opportunity to raise money for the school fund. There were various stalls, bottle, cake, white elephant, nearly new. There were games such as Skittles and penalty prize. There was a Punch and Judy show, a fancy dress parade, and a boys' brigade band. The other thing which made Sports Day special was the attitude of Mr. Blocker. Most heads have something in their school which they take a particular interest in. It could be the sport play, or the school choir, the school dinners even. In Mr. Blocker's case, it was Sports Day. The story was that he had once run for the county, but no details were available. Eric and Roy passed beneath the flapping banner and joined the growing crowd. It was 2:00. Already the stalls had begun selling and the games and competitions were in progress. The athletics event wouldn't begin until 2:30. Councillor Mrs. Beanland would be there to start the first race and later to present the cup to the winning house. As he wandered between the stalls, Roy had a go on the hoopla and inadvertently won a bottle of ketchup. He tried guessing the number of Smarties in a jar and bought a bundle of old comics from the bookstore. Eric concentrated on keeping close to Roy while watching out for his mum and Emily. They were likely to be around somewhere, although the fancy dress wasn't due until 4:00. From time to time, Mr. Blocker's voice boomed out over the public address. He welcomed everybody to the sports and reminded them that there was a refreshment area near the pavilion. He urged them to buy raffle tickets and mentioned Councillor Beanland, and he told certain boys to cease their interference with the groundsman's sprinkler. At 2:20, Eric and Roy went up onto the grass bank. Eric was grateful to be out of the crowd and welcomed the chance to rest his little legs. Furthermore, at the back of the bank, there was an area of much longer grass which would make a useful hiding place if need arose. Eric lay with his head on his paws and shut his eyes against the glare of the sun. He thought about the scene in the park. Sooner or later, Joan and Alison were going to guess if Roy didn't actually tell them, that is. He would have to talk to Roy. He thought about his mum and dad and the trouble that he'd be in once he got home. Roy, meanwhile, was propped up on his elbows, having a quick look at his comics. He was also eating a sherbet dip and, apparently, thinking about Eric. "Don't get distemper, Eric," he said. "They give you a needle in your bum." At that moment, a voice said, "Excuse me." Eric and Roy looked up. A large woman in a red dress was standing beside them. She was out of breath from climbing the bank. She said, "Excuse me, but is this your dog?" Yes, said Roy. "Don't mind me asking, but what do you call him?" Rex, said Roy. He couldn't bring himself to say Eric. Oh, the woman looked disappointed, embarrassed too. Is he a smart dog? Is he? Very, said Roy, and he understands every word I say. I can believe it, said the woman. Then another smaller woman in a green dress at the bottom of the bank joined in. Come on, Francis, I want a cup of tea. Coming, said the first woman, and then, don't mind me asking, but has he ever done any sort of funny business with his paw? She lowered her voice. Sort of writing like. Then Eric guessed who she was. So did Roy. No, he said. Oh, said the woman. Francis, said the other woman. Coming, said Francis. She turned and began to descend the bank. Rex, you said? Roy nodded. She reached the bottom, linked arms with her friend, and went away. As soon as she'd gone, Roy said, That was the woman who saw you writing, wasn't it? Ah, Woof, said Eric. I think I put her off, though. Ah, Woof, said Eric. Then Roy said, Hey, it's starting. Eric scrambled to his feet. Down on the track, Mr. Blocker, in his best suit, was escorting Councillor Beanland to the starting line. Come on, Frobisher, shouted Roy. The woman in the red dress had vanished from his thoughts. Frobisher was one of the house teams, the others being Raleigh, Nelson, and Drake. Councillor Beanland raised her pistol, and the race began. The crowd cheered. Frobisher came nowhere. After that, Roy returned to his comics, while keeping a close watch on his friend, just in case. It crossed his mind that Eric could do with a collar and a lead, though he doubted if he'd agree. Eric, for a time, remained on his feet and continued to look around. On the track, he could see Mrs. Jessup herding half a dozen infant girls in sacks behind the starting line. Another teacher, Mrs. Tucker, was putting the scores up on a blackboard near the judge's table. Mr. Moody, in his best suit, was preparing to start the second race. Farther off, a boy, it might have been Hopper, was climbing onto the pavilion roof. In the distance, traffic was passing in the Bowles Road. The woman in the red dress was nowhere to be seen. Eric moved closer to Roy and began reading over his shoulder. Eric and Roy stayed on the bank for another 10 minutes. During this time, Roy bundled up his comics and put them in his bag. He read the label on his bottle of ketchup, finished the sherbet dip, and watched a couple of races. He was in no hurry to get change for his own, because the relays were the last events. Eric watched the races too, and he also gave more thought to the situation without thinking of anything new. At one point, he resisted the urge to scratch himself with his back leg. Then, at 3 o'clock, something happened. A rather gruff voice came out over the public address. We have a message here about a missing child. The voice belonged to Mr. Hodge. It's a little girl, 3 years old, dressed in a... What? Someone, it would appear, was giving him the details. A Bo-Peep costume. Immediately, Eric leapt to his feet. Her name is Emily, and she was last seen a few minutes ago in the... Where? The toddler's playground. Roy leapt to his feet. Did you hear that? Oh, Woof, said Eric. He was already scrambling down the bank. Anyone seeing this child, please bring her to the announcer's table. Thank you. The toddler's playground was a patch of grass with the pavilion on one side and the refreshment area on the other. It contained a climbing frame, a wooden slide, 2 little bikes, 3 pedal cars, a Wendy house, and some large building blocks, all borrowed for the day from Tividale Nursery. A teacher from the nursery was there to keep an eye on things, helped by a couple of older girls from the comprehensive. When Eric, closely followed by Roy, arrived, he found a considerable crush of people. Most of them were on their way to get a cup of tea, or on their way from having had one. In the playground, a number of small children were playing. One of them was Malky Briggs. Eric trotted forward and, almost without thinking, began to sniff around. He could smell grass and warm wood and tea. He could smell the nursery teacher's perfume, although she'd left to join the search for Emily. Roy crouched beside him. "How we doing, Eric? Found anything?" Eric made no reply, but continued to follow his nose. He could smell donuts and cigarette smoke. Eric had read about dogs and their sense of smell. How could they pick up the trail of a fox, or a convict, or a truffle even? At the time, he hadn't really understood how it was done, but now he was beginning to find out. He could smell suntan oil and privet. Then, as he approached the wooden slide, one of the comprehensive girls spotted him. She frowned and said to Roy, "No dogs." "Right," said Roy, "I'll get him." Eric heard all this and ignored it. He could smell cloth and warm wood again, and he gave a sudden bark of triumph. "Emily!" Emily's smell was a mixture of her mother's talc, that Emily loved to use, her grandma's kitchen floor polish, and Emily's plastic sandals. Emily's feet, and Emily! Everyone, he now remembered reading, had his own personal smell, like fingerprints. "Nearly got him," said Roy, in answer to more frowns from the comprehensive girls. But Eric was picking up speed and looking anything but got. Nose first, like a small brown hoover, he skimmed across the grass. The pattern of Emily's trail led this way and that. She had played on everything, it seemed. When Eric had read about dogs following trails, the thing that had puzzled him and Roy most was, how did the dog know which end of the trail was which? However, now that he was required to do it himself, it proved to be no problem at all. Emily's trail was like a dotted line drawn on the ground. It faded in the direction that she'd come from and was stronger in the direction that she'd gone. Nor did Eric have trouble with the other trails. Malky's, for instance, which crisscrossed Emily's. The more he followed hers, the more tuned in he was to it, like a radio signal, and the less interference he got from other stations. Emily's trail, as it turned out, was short. It led out of the toddler's playground, past the pavilion, twice around the unattended Punch and Judy tent, back towards the pavilion, up onto the pavilion steps, down again, up again, down again, and finally behind the pavilion. During this time, Roy kept as close to Eric as he could. He tried to give the appearance of being in charge. Now and then he got funny looks from passers-by. The path at the side of the pavilion was narrow and hemmed in by 2 cricket pitch rollers and an enormous mower. There was a machine for marking white lines, the powerful smell of which temporarily threw Eric off the scent and made him sneeze. Fortunately, by this time he hardly needed a scent. He blinked. His eyes were watering, and he continued down the path and turned a corner. Eric now found himself in a small triangular space, fenced in on 2 sides, with the back of the pavilion making the third. This space contained a pile of wooden stakes and some coils of rope. It also contained Emily and a huge bull mastiff. The mastiff was looking fiercely, or so it seemed to Eric, at Emily. Emily was looking benignly at the mastiff. Worse still, she was approaching it with both hands out as though she meant to cuddle it. Eric didn't hesitate. He gave a brave bark and leapt to the rescue. That's the end of the chapter. Have a lovely day, and